Okay, we're starting. Okay, so before we get to the part about Satan's attempts to cut off the line of Christ ahead of time, what was I going to say now? I was going to say something. Boy, I had something. Oh, anyway. So the idea behind this we've talked about in Esther. Esther is one of the more obvious ones. Of somebody trying to cut off the line of the Jews. Um, you know, but the thing is do they even know what they're doing? Do they know, oh yeah, we're going to, harass the Jews, try to kill the Jews, try to deport the Jews, because we know in their lineage is Messiah. They don't, and I don't think when we see Mordecai and Esther standing up for saving their Jewish people, their people, I don't think that they know that that's what they're protecting. Okay, it's God working behind the scenes. But I think as we study these examples of where the lineage was, somebody was attempting to cut it off, uh, that it helps us in a way that we read the scriptures, especially the Old Testament. Because again, these are all behind the scenes types of things. We'll see like when Pharaoh orders all the midwives, to kill off the male children. It helps you understand that it's not just because he's trying to, because he's afraid that the Jews are going to multiply too fast. That's what his concern is. Jews are going to multiply too fast and they're going to take over the land or whatever, his thing was there. But really, it's Satan working in the background to try to cut off the line to Jesus. So here's the thing. Does anybody get confused by the Old Testament, or at least in trying to put it together? Because, in the Old Testament, there's many obscure and scattered, um, uh, and confusing passages or chapters. You got to remember, they're talking about 39 different books in the Old Testament written over like 1,000-year period. How do we make sense out of, how do you blend them all together? So many times, the Old Testament's like a jigsaw puzzle. I mean, if I dump a jigsaw puzzle on each of your tables, but I just dumped them out of the box. You don't have the box. And I dump them out of the box. Are you going to have any idea what it is that you're doing or what it is that your goal is going to be? Am I going to make a puzzle of 3 puppy dogs? I mean, how would you know, Frank?
Well, you start with the edges because they're straight and slowly move around going, but
okay. After you get the edge, though, how do you know what to put in the middle? But I'm saying, do you have a purpose in what you're doing? Jerry Buntmeyer did this jigsaw puzzle. I don't know how many of those. This is a jigsaw puzzle. Really? Yeah, I didn't know that. And we had something to work on.
Right. It's no crazy.
And so that's where we end up in a lot of these Old Testament, readings and that. And the reason I'm going off on this tangent a little bit is because I kept saying, we'll discuss Satan trying to cut off the line as we're going through Esther. But then when I stop to think about it, I go, really the Old Testament's like that is like that for people. So anyway, so what I was going to say, so if I dump the pieces on your tables, you have all the pieces. You have everything that it takes to make a jigsaw puzzle. And that's the same thing with the Old Testament, because the Old Testament people didn't understand the purpose of the Old Testament at all. they could follow rules, kind of. God wiped them out a couple times because they didn't. But I'm just saying, but they had all the laws, they have all the rules, they have all the writings, they have God's word, but they could never put it together to the meaning, because the meaning is about Jesus. Like that. Now, some of them got as far as the faith part, but they had faith in God, and they just knew that God was faithful, you know, and or that God's generous, like Pastor was talking about today. You know, as long as we know that God's generous and we keep that in our mind in everything that we do and everything that we're looking for in God, is that no matter how bad things get, we just know we got that promise. God is, you know, God's generous. So anyway, so what's the difference? What would be the one thing that makes the jigsaw puzzle come together? What's that?
God's plan throughout it all.
Yeah, but how do they, well, that's in the background again, God's plan. But how do you know what the puzzle's supposed to look like? The puzzle, no, the box top. That's why I said if I dump the pieces on your desk, you're not going to know. But if I give you the box top's going to tell you what the puzzle's supposed to be. You know, and you go, oh, now I know. So you see, if there's in the picture, if there's a bunch of red, you see a bunch of red, you know, okay, I know that those pieces that I see red go in the center somewhere. You know, and this was, so then you start doing the pieces, you're matching the shapes. Obviously, I probably haven't done a puzzle for 1,000 years, and I wouldn't attempt to it. You know, Tom Mellencamp, what's the last name? Mavencamp. He does puzzles. You know, if you've ever been over Bill's house, you know, he's got them framed and all that. He's got them on his table, and you know, he does puzzles. I mean, it's not that I can't do puzzles. I won't even start. I mean, why? Okay, so the difference is, and we're gonna say something, Frank?
Well, if I wanna get frustrated, I can just talk to my ex-wife.
Okay, anyway. So here's the thing. What's the box top for the Old Testament that's going to explain to you what it is? Well, the Messiah, but the New Testament. The New Testament's going to put the pieces together of what it, you know, of what it means, what the Old Testament meant, what those different stories or prophecies, you know, were about. And I've got an example here in First Corinthians. Now, here's the thing: does God speak mysteriously to His people? Yeah, He does. No, I mean He does. Where's my Bible? In you know, in Matthew 13. Hang on, let me get there. Matthew 13. I guess this is why people use their phones. You get to it faster. Well, I can't get my fingers to go through it. You know, in Matthew 13, he gives the parable of the where's the parable of the sower? Yeah, the parable of the sower. Okay, he gives the parable of the sower, and then at the end, let's see, here's root new cells, blah blah blah. Why am I not finding it? I think 13, or maybe, let me see. Hang on, it's here, I know it's here. Should have wrote it, I should have wrote it down, but I'm talking to you in mysterious languages now. Let me see. Where does he do this? Parable of oh, here. So he gives the parable of sower at the very beginning of 13. I was looking in the middle of 13 because he gives it twice. Anyway, at the beginning, and then in verse 10, okay, in verse 10 of chapter 13 of Matthew, it says, Then the disciples came and said to him, Why do you speak to them in parables? And he answered them, To you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. For to the ones who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But for the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. This is why I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, hearing they do not hear, and they do not understand. And he goes into the whole Isaiah prophecy thing there. So even when well, I was going to say, even when Jesus is speaking clearly, because you read the parable of the sower and you're still kind of scratching your head. Now, we've heard it enough times that we've had it explained that we can read it now and, understand it. But what we see with a couple of the parables, after Jesus gives the parable, then he gets alone with um, gets alone with the disciples, and that's later on in chapter 13. He explains the parable of the sowers to them because even though they have ears to hear and that they can get it, but they don't. So he explains it. Well, here's the thing. This goes back to the Old Testament. In 1 Corinthians 2, this is Paul writing to the Corinthians, okay? And he says, and I, when I came to you, brothers, did not come proclaiming to you the testimony of God with lofty speech or wisdom. He says, I just came plain talking to you. For I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and much trembling, and my speech and my message were not in plausible words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit of the powers, so that your faith might not rest in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. And this is important. This isn't the part that I'm getting to, but I wanted to kind of roll into it. But this is the thing. Is the power of God versus the wisdom of men. Because so many times we get off into listening to the wisdom of men, you know? I don't know who believes what about this in here, but like the creation account, the wisdom of man says we're billions of years old. Look at our data. Yeah, but what do the words of God say? They don't say that. And so then it becomes down to, okay, who are we going to believe? Are we going to believe um, what is it called, the wisdom of men or the power of God? And there's a whole bunch of things that are like that. Well, then he says, so Paul's saying that he has the power of the Holy Spirit now. This is what he's telling the Corinthians. I now have the Spirit of God. Here's the thing with Paul. Paul was a Jewish rabbi. We never hear Paul preaching as a Jewish rabbi. What did he preach or teach as a Jewish rabbi? What could he have to teach? I have to look into that. I've looked into this before and I've never found a satisfactory answer because I cannot find a commentary on the Old Testament that was written before Jesus' time. Nothing. I can't, at least I can't find anything. If there's something out there in some dusty old, library and under the sand in Egypt, I don't know, because you want to know, well, what were they thinking? What were they preaching? Everything that we have now comes after Jesus. If you talk about if they talk about the Babylonian Talmud or the Mishnah or all those things were after Jesus. And a lot of commentaries that the Jews have are in reaction to Jesus, like that, because the first Christians were Jews, and then 4th century, 5th century, the Jews started writing, but a lot of it was their commentary, their interpretation, but it was really in the light of Jesus, and they were kind of writing, against that. But anyway, so this is what Paul says. He says in verse 6 of 1 Corinthians 2, he says, yet among the mature, we do not impart wisdom, although it is not a wisdom of this age or the rulers of this age who are doomed to pass away. So what is the wisdom of this age or the rulers of this age? This age that, Paul's speaking about. Usually they're cast as demons, or the devil himself, the spirits in the spirit in the sky. Wait, that was Norman Greenbaum. Um, But it's also the people that are influenced by that. He's saying, I'm not speaking by the Spirit, it's the Spirit of this age. He says, but we impart a secret and hidden wisdom from God. This is what started this was, does God speak to us mysteriously? Is there a hidden wisdom of God? Is there a hidden wisdom of God that the people weren't supposed to understand? Yeah. Well, why would he do that? Yeah, I'm going to tell you. He says, and a hidden wisdom of God, which God decreed before the ages of our glory. None of the rulers of this age understood, for if they had, they would have not crucified the Lord of glory. So he's saying that if anybody had understood, they wouldn't have crucified Christ. But he also makes it sound like it was hidden from the people so that they wouldn't know, which is kind of like the parable, the parable story. He says, but as it is written, what no eye have seen, nor ear heard, nor the heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who loved him, these things God has revealed to us through the Spirit, for the Spirit searches everything, even the depths of God. So now you've got Paul preaching, because he has the Holy Spirit. He has whatever interactions he's had with the apostles who traveled with Jesus and learned from Jesus. All of a sudden, you have this new light. So Paul is going to all these synagogues. He's preaching from the scriptures. What were the scriptures? The Old Testament. The same Testament, same Hebrew Bible that the Jews always had. But now he's preaching a different message because it has been opened up to him. What did it say? The hidden wisdom of God has now been decreed. Yeah.
So it's sort of like Paul and Jesus did a mind map.
Okay. But you have to come up with a strange Latin theological word for that. Otherwise, it doesn't count. Anyway, so the New Testament box tops the Old Testament jigsaw puzzle box. So now that we can look at the box top, all of a sudden prophecies like Daniel 9. I don't know how much you guys know about these, but of Isaiah 53, which talks about the suffering servant, Daniel 9 talks about when Jesus will come, when Messiah will come, and that there's limitations for when he could come. Messiah, Jews today will say, well, they're still waiting for Messiah to come. But they can't, according to Daniel 9, because Daniel 9 says that he comes before the destruction of the temple. And since the temple's been destroyed in 70 AD, there are no genealogical records because all the genealogical records were kept in the temple. And so when the temple was destroyed and burned, everything's gone. Nobody can come and say, I'm from the tribe of so-and-so, and Jesus had to come from a certain tribe. Okay. So anyway. And that's how you can look at it. You can look at, Micah 3 makes sense now of Messiah being born in Bethlehem, and just all those different prophecies, they come into line. Now, for those who still have doubts, and everybody has doubts, anybody here not have doubts? Okay. Listen to this. This is after Jesus rose from the dead. This I'm going to give you permission to doubt, because doubt isn't bad. Rejection of stuff is bad. Rejection of the truth is bad. But doubting, don't know. Matthew 28, 16, verses 16 and 17. So this is within a couple of verses of the end of the book of Matthew after the resurrection. And it says, now the 11 disciples went to Galilee to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. Because he said, hey, I'm going to meet you later over here. And in verse 17, and when they saw him, they worshiped him. And then right after that it says, but some doubted. I mean, these are his disciples, you know? They've had all this firsthand interaction with him. Now they're seeing him raised from the dead. And it says, and they worshiped him, but some doubted. This is tough stuff. I mean, it really, it really is.
Well, they directed how to go down to the ascension.
No, I know. That's what I'm saying, because this is, 40 days before the ascension. I'm just saying that imagine how hard it is for us, but you got the Apostle Paul saying that this whole new thing has cleared it all up. Now, Paul's after the incident before, before the ascension and that, but yeah. So so what you have to do, I guess what I'm saying is what you have to do is like when we read Esther, we have to read it in the light of the New Testament. And the Jews couldn't do that. The Jews of, the Hebrews of old, they couldn't do that. They didn't have the Old Testament. They could learn the history of what was happening in Esther. They could see maybe that God was faithful if they wanted to go that far. Again, God's not mentioned in the book of Esther, so we don't know who saved them. Could have just been the wisdom of Esther and Mordecai. That they stood up to Haman and they persuaded the king, and the message there would be, keep trying, be faithful, persuade your enemies. I mean, whatever it might be, but that's not what the message is really. So anyway, so you got those 2-page handout here, or how many pages? We'll just go through a couple of them. But Satan's attempts to cut off the Messianic line leading to Jesus. The murder of Cain and Abel, murder of Cain and Abel, the murder of Abel, by Cain. Cain was the favored child. Cain worshiped properly. Cain's sacrifice was accepted by God. Abel's wasn't. Okay, so one of those two. Wish they wore jerseys so I could tell them apart. Anyway, so Abel kills Cain. No, Cain kills Abel. Abel comes first. It's an A. No, Cain kills Abel. Why would Cain kill Abel? I mean, when you think of,
Jealousy.
Well, yeah, but where does that come from? See, that's the thing. That's what I'm saying. That's the thing. Satan gets in our hearts without us even knowing about it. He didn't have to talk to the snake or, anything, because this is after the snake, the serpent, like that. But Satan just somehow pokes him along, and that becomes the solution to Cain's problems. But what it is for Satan is he wants to kill off the golden child, the good kid, like that. So, yeah. See, and so if you're looking at it with Satan working in the background, then when we read these passages, I think you look at them a little bit differently. Oh yeah.
I did another deep dive with this, and I asked the question: what percentage of sins can be
What percentage of what?
Sins.
Sins?
What percentage of our sin can be realistically blamed on the devil? And it gives me this is a deep and important question. Touches on theology, human responsibility, spiritual warfare, from the biblical and especially Lutheran perspective. Here's the balanced look. 0% can be blamed only on the devil, but he contributes to temptation. The responsibility of sin is fully with us.
Yeah, the devil can only tempt.
Right.
Okay, the devil can only tempt. The people are all the person who does the act is always responsible. So I mean, see, Satan could go, oh, I didn't kill Abel. Yeah, that guy did. Now, what's his name? Flip Wilson, he'd say, "Ah, devil made me do it." You know, like that. But that's important. Satan can only, tempt people. He can't make people. The sad part is that we're easy to be tempted. Pardon?
For easy marks.
Yeah, no, that's why you have to protect yourself. That's why in what I'm gonna guess, Galatians 6, I think it is, where it talks about putting on the armor of God. That's the whole reason, to fend off those fiery darts, of the devil. But most times, even Christians don't even give the devil a second thought to think that he's after me. He might be after that. He's after those Presbyterians, but he's not after us Lutherans. No, is that, it's never about us, that we have to keep our guard up.
Well, as soon as you're baptized, you're a mark. Right away he goes, that's the one.
Yeah.
So
As soon as,
he's on you 24/7, minute you're baptized, I want to get the.
it's like they say, there's a war going on between God and Satan, and you're the battlefield.
Oh, we got it.
Yeah. Anyway, so the number 2 there, corruption of humanity before the flood in Genesis 6. How wicked were the people? They're bad to the bone. Like that. What made society so bad? Here they're just, I don't know how many years they are. We did this when we studied the first 11 chapters of Genesis a couple of years ago. But in that timeline, the distance between Cain killing Abel and the time of the flood, I mean, not that much time. It would be a couple hundred years. I don't remember. Probably a little more than that. But they had God with them. They had God with them in the garden. They had God working with them, through the generations and the genealogies. And you see places where God's head popped. And then you come in Genesis 6, and the whole world is corrupt. Now there may have been more direct intervention, by evil, by the devil, whatever you want to call it. Who are these, sons of man and the daughter, what is it, the sons of God and the daughters of man, and who are they? And there's all kinds of wild stories, about aliens or spirits from other worlds. Well, you know what? In some of the ancient writings, this is the theme. You read, what was that, Ray? The Book of Enoch? A Book of Enoch, which isn't in the Bible, but it's a well-distributed book from times. They didn't go back to then, but at some times that were trying to explain, and maybe people had interventions with that. We don't know. They could be demons that were disguised, or whatever the right word would be, as extraterrestrials, or whatever they might be. Whatever it was, I'm sure, well, it's out of the heart of man to be wicked, but the whole world was corrupt. But there's Satan. If I get God to wipe out all his people, I don't have to worry about them like that. And just the 8 were saved.
Could God create man? Could he? I mean, there's other worlds. There's more sand, there's more stars in the universe than there are
Grains of sand on it. Could God do it? Yeah, God could do it.
That's God's creation, so there are aliens.
Well, no. You say that's God's creation, so there are aliens. So you made the leap. Bible doesn't say that.
Create that.
Pardon?
Why can't God make aliens?
God could, but what I'm saying is that the Bible doesn't say anything about aliens.
Because they didn't understand it. They actually drew drawings of showing like a space with light, and they're looking up all the time.
Right.
There's clouds, and they don't understand it because they haven't even seen a plane.
Right, and
So they're going like, wow, is that?
Right, and the new Superman movie came out this week, and do we have Superman?
Well, I'm not talking about Superman. Jesus is our Superman. God is the Father. I'm just saying he can do anything he wants. He can create aliens.
God,
There's something smarter than us.
God could, but we have no evidence that he did.
Right, because they never understood. It's like a puzzle. It's scattered. They go like, I don't know what that is.
Right,
it's
but,
there.
and I only correct you for this reason, is because if we read the Bible, we can't interject what we think could be, because you can do a whole bunch with
You
it.
just gotta follow
Yeah, well, yeah, but see, the people that wrote the Bible were spoken to by God.
Right.
So God could have said, whether they understood it or not, hey, by the way, did you ever used to watch Ray Walston and My Favorite Martian? You know, well, that was one of my people that I sent to Earth to make things, you see, you could do the whole thing.
So that's bad.
Yeah,
Re-evolving thing.
no, it's bad to
So
add
that's
that.
almost a distraction from going where you're supposed to go. All that other stuff is BS in some ways.
Could be, yeah.
But I say it's not. I say it's interesting and I wanna learn about it.
Well,
That's the guy created it.
No, that's fine.
Alright.
That's fine. Okay, so the Tower of Babel, that's a, you know, a well-known one, where Satan's stirred rebellion to unify mankind against God and thwart God's purposes. Remember, they were making a tower that was going to take them up to, we're going to show God that we can reach up to him, that we don't have to depend on him coming down, you know, to reach down to us. So that's Satan putting in their hearts, here, go challenge God. You know, and it says, you know, when they're doing that, if you read the account, it says, and God looked down on them, and then God came down. And it's like, God, let's go, wait, let me see what these crazy people are doing, you know, what these crazy people are doing. But what they're doing is they're following Satan. Threats to Abraham and Sarah. This is when Sarah got taken by the two Egyptian kings or Arabian kings and that. And, you know, where Abraham, being the bold man that he was, said, well, don't tell them you're my wife. You know, tell them you're my sister, because if they think you're my wife, they might kill me. Okay. But anyway, but again, so Sarah could have been in the line of some Egyptian pharaoh, you know, there. Let's see. Let's go down. Let's see. Well, number 7, the famines in Canaan. Again, Satan trying to destroy the Jewish people through the famine. And then what they do? They went to Egypt for survival, but all that did was throw them into slavery. You know, so Satan, he thinks he's got this all, you know, that he's got this all figured out like that. Number 8, Pharaoh's order, we talked about this, to kill the Hebrew baby boys. That's when Moses was put in the little boat and sent down river. But the idea is that, see, Pharaoh, he's thinking militarily, the Jews are going to gain in population. Pretty soon they'll be big enough to challenge us, you know, and fight us. So we've got to get rid of them. But who's the first one that probably whispered in his ear and said, Pharaoh, have you noticed what's happening with the Jewish women and all the babies they're having? And it's probably satanic somehow. And again, I don't understand how the satanic works, you know, at all. I guess I'd have to look in my diary journal to see how it's affected me, you know, like that. But we don't know how that gets, done. We don't know. We could read a book, you know, that Satan has put something in the author. And I'm not talking about witchcraft, just that he's put something in the author, and it's probably not as overt as I'm making it sound. But we read it and we go, you know, that sounds like a better idea than what I'm following with Jesus right now. You know, or somebody introduces you to a Ouija board or, you know, and things like that. And it starts out slow.
gene.
Yeah.
But genocide is part of the world right now. I mean, they talk about killing the babies. I mean, look what they're doing like these other weeks. They're slaughtering people because they're just doing it. It's
Right,
the
right.
devil's still going at it full throttle.
No, well, no, the whole idea of killing the babies, once it got put in Pharaoh's ear, it wasn't like it was a strange concept to him. I'm sure they'd just take the things that the world does and just says, here, I bet you could do it better. You know? So let me just read through. You guys, you can take these home, you can look them up. Israel's idolatry and apostasy in the wilderness. There's one where Satan puts in your heart that there's a better way to do it than God's way, and you just run off with it. And that's what that 40 years of rebellion in the wilderness was. So Balak and Balaam, that's where they tried to put curses on Israel. Let's see. Let's go. Saul's apostasy, number 14, Saul's apostasy, an attempt to kill David. There's a direct attack. What's his name? Saul was probably at the end demonically oppressed. I mean, he really turned into a wicked guy, but he just figures he's got to wipe David out. Pretty hard to be the son of David if David gets wiped out. I mean, that's a direct, attack. Let's see. Number 16, Athaliah's attempt to exterminate the Davidic line. This is where she wanted to be in power. You'd have to read the story. I got the references there. You have to read the story. But she wanted to be in power. She killed off the family. She killed her grandkids and everything like that, except for Joash had been hidden away, or he was gone, or he was hidden, and he maintained the line. God protected him and maintained the line. But imagine, when grandma comes to visit. Yeah. Anyway, number 20 gets you down to Haman's plot to annihilate the Jews in the book of Esther. Anyway, you can have this. Keep it, like I say, if you're doing daily Bible readings, read the passages that are here. This would keep you busy for a month.
Could make a great movie.
Hmm?
Could make a great movie.
I hear it's the greatest story ever told.
I know, but it's all at the top. It's this. It's bad.
Okay. Let's go to the other page, the book of Esther. Book of Esther, chapter 8. Last week in chapter 7, and we kind of rushed through the end. Was it last week? I don't remember. Anyway, but Haman got hung on his own gallows. He figured out a way. He was going to build gallows, and he was going to hang Mordecai on him, because Mordecai now had the favor of the king. So he built the gallows. His wife told him, "You're not going to escape from this," And then the one guy, I forget his name, at the end of chapter 7, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, he goes, "You won't believe it. Look out the window here and look what you got right next to Haman's house. He's built this 50-foot gallows, there." And the king said, "Hang him." Ooh, too bad he didn't say hang him high. But he said hang him. And that was the end of Haman. But remember, now he's got this decree out there, though. The decree had gone out a couple of chapters before to wipe out all the Jews in Persia, that big landmass that went from Egypt to Ethiopia, the 127 provinces. And I made an error on the very first words of the handout I've got there. I got king's decree is revoked. And it wasn't revoked. I don't know why I wrote that. Yeah. But
Devil made you do it.
devil made me do it. That's right. He wanted to keep God out of the picture, Like that. But we'll see in verse 8, when they make a new decree, they have to make a new decree. And he tells them, your new decree, make it up whatever you want to save your people, and you have it with the authority of the king, and you can seal it with my ring. Because it says, because it's, I'll read it so I get it right. It says, for an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with his ring cannot be revoked. So this goes two ways. This new decree that Esther and Mordecai will write up can't be broken because it's with the authority of the king and sealed with his ring. But that means that the previous one also can't be broken because it was done by the king and sealed with his ring. And that, now you would think that he'd say, send out the word, call off the dogs, like that, but he can't. I mean, imagine, so what happens the next time the king makes a decree and seals it with his ring? How permanent is it? People can't have confidence. You know, we see that in reverse with presidential executive orders. One president gives out an executive order. The executive order is only good for his term or until they get reversed. Next president comes in, writes an executive order reversing the previous executive order. I mean, unless Congress has validated, or whatever the right word is, that executive order and put it into law, if it just stays an executive order, next guy just has no legal standing after that. And that's what you would end up with here. And how you got to remember, this isn't for the good of the people, this is for the good of the king. Sounds like our times. Anyway, so it said that in Esther 1 there, it says, on that day, King Ahasuerus gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. What does that mean? She picked up real estate? Huh?
Yeah.
She got, hey, this is a cool house. I don't think that's what it means. Yeah. I think that what it means is he gave to Esther Mordecai, because Mordecai will get it, his office, whatever his office was. He gave to him the Secretary of Defense, or whatever Haman was, like that. Anyway, whatever authority Haman had, that was given over to Esther. Hang on, I want to get to the. Let's see. Let me get to this here. Okay, so on that day, King Ahasuerus gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. Remember, Mordecai got promoted. Remember he'd read in the Chronicles of the Kings, and he found out that, hey, it's written in here that Mordecai saved the king's life. And Mordecai said, hey, what do we ever do to reward this guy? And that's when king said, give him all this, give him all this. And Haman thought it was for himself, and it wasn't. So he's got all this stuff. But the king still doesn't know who Mordecai is to Esther. Okay, so she brings Mordecai in so that she can tell the king. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. And the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. So now this is almost like Mordecai gets to dance on Haman's grave. So the king is working through the queen. She finds out that Mordecai is the cousin, like that. He gives the royal ring or whatever that's supposed to signify, gives it to Mordecai. And now Mordecai is, second most powerful man in the Persian Empire. I mean, now you got a Jew being this. Here they went from being wiped out, supposed to be wiped out, to two Jews are now, queen and prime minister, or whatever you want to call them. That's God working in the background. Just when you think that all is, all is lost. But I'll tell you, the book doesn't end with it saying, oh, and by the way, God was behind all this. No mention at all. Anybody have a hand up or something? I had my head down, so. Verse 3, then Esther spoke again to the king. She fell at his feet and wept and pleaded with him to avert the evil plan of Haman the Agagite and the plot that was devised against the Jews. Remember, now the plot was, just as a reminder, the plot was on so-and-so date in so-and-so month, all the Jews are supposed to be wiped out. They gave enough time, they put it in the future, they gave enough time so one word could get out. The Persians could prepare for the slaughter, and the Jews could prepare for death. I guess that's better than just having the marauders show up, cutting off your head, and you have no reason why all of a sudden they're mad at you. There's probably really no good side to it, but let's see. He said, if it pleased the king, this is in verse 5, if it pleased the king, and if I found favor in his sight, and if the thing seemed right before the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let an order be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman the Agagite, the son of that guy, I can't pronounce his name, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all the provinces of the king. For how can I bear to see the calamity that is coming to my people, or how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred? So she's pleading for her people. She's going to reverse the order. She goes, how am I supposed to live with this? How am I supposed to be queen here if I've watched all my people? She's very reverent to the king. She says, if I please you, if this, grant my request. She just come in and say, hey, Xerxes, come here. I'm your wife. Let me tell you what you're going to do now. Didn't work that way then. So he says, let's see. For how can I bear? Let's see. How can I? Okay. Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, behold, I have given Esther the household of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows because he intended to lay hands on the Jews. But you may write as you please with regard to the Jews in the name of the king and seal it with the king's ring. An edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked. So he's telling them, when you write it the way you want to write it, just remember that what you do, it can't be revoked. It's in my name, the king. It's not your name. It's in my name, the king, and it can't be, revoked. The king's scribes, those are, his dictation secretaries. The king's scribes were summoned at that time in the 3rd month, which is the 7th month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day. An edict was written according to all that Mordecai commanded concerning the Jews to the satraps and to the governors and the officials of the provinces from India to Ethiopia. So they're covering all of it. It's going to all the government officials. 127 provinces, to each province in its own script, and to each people in its own language, and also to the Jews in their script and language. We said this when the first edict went out. The Persian Empire is made up of conquered nations. As they expand all the things, people still speak their languages. Like when America took the Philippines, say, I can't think of an adjacent place. Well, I guess maybe when we took, in the contingent states, we go to take the natives and all that, they spoke their languages. Like when we took over the Philippines, or we took over Puerto Rico, or we took over all the places that we take over, they still speak their languages, You know, in those examples, they speak Spanish. So that's what, you know, I don't know how many different language groups they got there, but they wrote it all out in the languages that they needed to write it out in so that they made sure that the people understood. And it says, and also to the Jews in their scripted language. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed it with the king's signet ring. Then he sent the letters by mounted couriers riding on swift horses that were used in the king's service, bred from the royal stud, saying that the king allowed the Jews who were in every city to gather and defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate any army force of any peoples or provinces that might attack them, children and women included, and to plunder their goods. So 2 points. Looks like they had a Pony Express system back then. It sounds like they've got special horses bred from a special stud that could run fast. I mean, I'm just reading reading the text, but it's just that I got to remember this is probably their only communications on anything, not just this thing. Hey, I want to raise the tax in your province. You got to get the message out quick, stuff like that. But look at what the edict was. I mean, Mordecai's edict in defending themselves is as bad as the edict was for the Persian armies to wipe out the Jews. It's saying to the Jews, here, you can fight back, but you got to follow the Geneva Convention on the rules of war. We'll have to go get something from the Vatican on their definition of just war. No, just wipe them out. I don't care if they're women, kids, whatever, just wipe them out. I'm telling you, Bible's a brutal book sometimes. I mean, it doesn't try to cover up what was happening, because you got to remember, in the Bible times, it's about those people. It's not God's world in the garden. In the garden, everything was peaceful and proper and perfect. But as soon as they got kicked out of the garden, probably from stepping on all those thorns and thistles, made people mean and rotten, to where it gets to the point that this is what the world's like. We can say something, Pastor?
Yes, sir. Notice that it says the people who might attack them. Because as it turns out, it isn't like the armies are attacking them. They're still annihilating people that aren't actually attacking them.
Yeah.
But it seems like that they should only be doing, the counterattack to those while they're being attacked, but they went beyond that.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like those beginning words were pretty much defensive. When they come on you, you're allowed to, do, because otherwise it would have been, well, on the 13th of May is the day that was set up for the Persians to wipe out the Jews. Well, on the 11th, the Jews sneak up and kill them before that day. Yeah. Again, it's one of those things where, we've got just the limited information. It says, then he sent the letters by mounted couriers, to kill, to annihilate. I lost one. On one day throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, a copy that was written was to be issued as a decree in every province, being publicly displayed to all peoples, and the Jews were to be ready on that day to take vengeance on their enemies. So the couriers, mounted on their swift horses that they used in the king's service, rode out hurriedly, urged the king's command, and the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel. This is a funny part, if you want to find a funny part. But here the Persians have a decree. On this day and at this time, you are to attack. The Jews, on the other hand, have an equally valid decree from the king that says, on so-and-so day and, at so-and-so time, you're to fight back. We don't know those things. And Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal robes of blue and white, with a great golden crown and a robe of fine linen and purple. And the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province and in every city wherever the king's command and his edict reached, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday, and many from the peoples of the country declared themselves Jews, for fear of the Jews had fallen on them. Right? So, so they're happy. They're just happy to be able to defend themselves. And that's all that Esther had asked for. She just asked that, how are we supposed to just put up with being wiped out? So now the people are happy that the decree went out, that the people can defend themselves. I don't know what was going to happen in Susa there, the capital. I mean, you got Jews there. It was the local army supposed to wipe out those people, but now those people are going to fight back, or was Susa kind of off, hands off area? I don't know, because they're not preparing for war. They're not preparing they're preparing a feast, and they're glad at that point that they can now announce that they're Jews, because all of a sudden now the fear wasn't there. Julie.
Say I want to become Jewish. Could I come to this, or you have to be from Jewish blood?
They do have rights of conversion, but it depends on which Jewish group. The Orthodox Jews wouldn't have anything to do with you. Okay, the Reformed Jews, they're the liberal wing. They'll take anybody. They'll just say, yeah, if you want to be with us, we'll teach you our ways and things like that.
All she's gotta do is look for, remember George on Seinfeld wanted to become Jewish so he could marry some woman, so.
Well, and see, that's one way that you could get in. No, but that's one way you could get in back door by marriage, because there's a lot of people who, see, I guess it depends on what it means to become Jewish. Let me backtrack a little bit. If you want to become Jewish and you wanted to go to Temple Beth, who they are by Smiths, I forgot their names. If you wanted to go, they'd welcome you with open arms. Okay, if you wanted to become a Jew and go live in Israel, you'd have a hard time like that. But there are ways that you can do it. Like I say, locally here, if you wanted to, they would welcome you with, open arms.
That most.
Do you know your wife thinks about this stuff, Pastor? Of leaving the religion? Who is?
Churches. And so are like Orthodox Jews, they don't think that. They just want.
None of the Jews do.
And even in Israel.
Even especially in Israel. Jews are not evangelistic at all. They tell you, you can be evangelistic all you want, just leave us alone, but they'll say, but we don't go out and evangelize others. It's kind of a birth religion. And they do have ways you can convert. You got to remember, even going across the wilderness, they would take in the people who lands that they conquered, or people that just happened to wander in, with them. But the thing is that they still had just one law, and you had to follow those laws. And those are religious laws too. So it can't be like, okay, I'm traveling with the Jews on these 40 days across the wilderness, and we're all having a good time. And hey, by the way, my family and I were having bacon and lettuce sandwiches over here. Should you choose to, that wouldn't be allowed in the camp, even though you're not necessarily, a full Jew with them. Who? Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, she probably, I'd have to look into that if she was ever Ruth the Jewess, or if she was just always Ruth the Moabite, who was with the, I mean, that's interesting. But, if she never, because maybe there was no way to become, I'll look into that because like I said, I don't know that she's ever called, Ruth the Jewess, like that. It seems like she's always called the Moabite. But then again, other people, hang on just a second. But then again, when uh, I can't remember who it was who they made the bargain with the other tribe of people to marry their daughters, the ones who raped Tamar, like that. And so they said, well, okay, you can become us and we can become you, and we'll give you our daughters and you give us your sons and all that. But first you have to be circumcised. And then, hey, it's a Bible story. And then while they were in that period of pain from the circumcision, the Jews wiped them out. So it's harder than you think. But I'm going to look into the Ruth thing, though. Okay.
Now, my friend Andrew Goldsmith, he's connected to a friend named Chuck Rich. Now, Chuck is Jewish, but he's not that Jewish. He doesn't really believe in God. So he's Jewish, but he doesn't believe God. That's the deal. He's still a good friend. Now, Andrew, he's gone to Israel, he's in the army kind of thing, and he's going there, and he's got the American Airlines again. He was my race partner, and he was great at working on jet skis. I hated working on jet skis, I riding. But Andrew, I never thought of him as Jew. I just thought, wow, he's a good mechanic. However, now he's become full-fledged 100,000% Jew, which is good. He is so happy, and he's, but he had to join the army and stuff. He's done all kinds of things. It's like almost.
The thing is that there's two parts of people who say that they're Jewish. One is ethnically, nationally, culturally, and they have nothing with the religion. And then you have those that have have the religion. I mean, Jewish groups would consider me Jewish if I wanted to be, because I was born to a Jewish family and stuff like, even though I don't claim to be Jewish, I don't claim to be a completed Jew, I don't claim a Messianic, any of those labels that they give. But because I was born of a Jewish mother, on their things, they say, you're always Jewish. You can't get, so it's more of a combination. To be a Christian, Christians have no ethnic background. They have no association with any known groups. It's your faith in Christ that identifies you as a Christian. So like in my case, I don't know where some of you may have come from, but in my case, I came out of Judaism into Christianity, not by accepting a culture, not by going through necessarily a ritual, but by having faith in the promises of God. Yeah. Okay, we're just going to finish up with.
I go to the bar, and I like it because they swim pro and they can deal with it. And I watch the kids, and they've got crosses on, and they're very, very nice, and they're very.
Who's that?
Kids at the bar, they're all 20 something or whatever, but they got crosses, and they come up and go, I love your cross, and they like, thank you, and they're very religious. I've seen more religion in a bar than in a church.
Well, but religious isn't what saves you. No.
I'm just saying,
People wear crosses as jewelry.
No, I know, but they're very, you can tell that they believe in a power. And they go, I know, I'm a good basketball player, but I don't give a power to God. You get your athletes say it too. They go, I don't take credit for this. I honor and peace God for making the
right, but their God could be Buddha, and that doesn't help them. Well, you don't know. You said they believe in a power.
Well, they go, thank God. We go, thank Jesus, they actually thank Jesus for being so good in that.
Oh, well, I'm not saying they're not, I'm just saying you can't tell, I'm not saying that they're not. I'm not.
They're
gonna-
not saying that I'm great, you know, they can say, oh, I'm so good, look at me, no, they go, I'm only good
Okay.
because Jesus made me good.
Okay, we've gone far enough. Let me turn this off, if I can find the right button.